morning, Paul.
Good morning, Ajahn Sumedho.
So today is Sunday, the 14th of February, 2021. Thank you for making yourself available for some more Dhamma reflections. Today's question is the following. You teach from your experience and have your own way of explaining certain things and choose words and phrasings that some people who are accustomed to reading suttas don't find in the scriptures. And sometimes they're a little bit puzzled and not sure what to make of the difference between the way you choose to explain Dhamma sometimes and what they read in the scriptures. Would you say something about that, please?
Well, we've got to remember the scriptures are not doctrinal positions. And they're not to be believed in and adhered to as beliefs or doctrines. All the Buddhist teachings are directional signs pointing. And where are they pointing at? When the Buddha gave his first sermon and talked about their suffering, what was he pointing to? Suffering as the state of the world in India at that time? Or was he said to understand suffering? To understand something, you have to observe suffering as you're experiencing it. And we can all recognize that suffering in the world, in the Middle East and in Yemen and various other places, not to mention here in England or Thailand or Sri Lanka. But the suffering of the First Noble Truth is not a kind of philosophical approach to suffering, but a very intuitive recognition of suffering is like this. So there's always this Pariyatti Dhamma, the study of the suttas is the beginning. And so those are, to be respected and used, but they're directional signs pointing at where they're pointing at you. Your state of mind, the suffering you're experiencing, your own delusions, your own ignorance that you operate from. So then the insights that come from Bhatibhata, from the practice, because there's always Pariyatti, Bhatibhata, Bhatiwait. And these three, that's a paradigm for insight. And Pariyatti Dhamma has its value, but it can't explain reality. It can't define reality. It can't give you a definition of Dhamma in words, in enlightenment or in Nibbana. These kind of words are have to be realized for yourself. And so, in Pali they say, Bhajatang Vetinapavanu, Dhamma has to be seen for yourself. It's not something that you can define in Pali and Sanskrit or any other language whatsoever. So insight, then that's Bhatiwait is insight, your own your own insight to be individually recognized, experienced by the wise. So sometimes we attach to Pariyatti Dhamma and we don't see our attachment to it. We see it as doctrinal positions that are absolute. And so that is the misuse of Buddhist teaching, because as wise and useful as the Buddhist teachings are, they're not for attachment. The whole encouragement of the Buddha is to observe, to be the witness. The word Buddha itself, is a Sanskrit Pali word which means witnessing, awakened consciousness. So also, considering my personal background, being brought up in America, born and bred in America, brought as a Christian, there's always a cultural influence in the way I talk or speak, a Western mindset that is used in the way I use the English language. So, interpreting Pali words or Sanskrit words into English, are you going to have exact equivalents? I mean, I've heard so many arguments among Western monks about the true meaning of dukkha, the Pali word for suffering. And, there's strong views that suffering is not the right word, that it's stress, or they're looking for the perfect equivalent in the English language, English vocabulary, that aligns itself perfectly with what the Buddha meant by dukkha. But it's to be understood, not to be defined. So in Bhatibhata, when you understand dukkha, it means you're looking inward. You're not studying the suffering external. You see a lot of suffering around you, or unfairness, injustices, wars, starvations, droughts, and that's part of planetary life, that is the human karma, really, of everyone. But the suffering we create out of ignorance of Dhamma is to be understood, and to understand something in a profound way, not just a superficial attitude about suffering, is to observe it in yourself. Your own feeling of anxiety or worry about the future, your regrets or guilt about the past, your wanting something you don't have, not wanting to be things the way they are. This is the causes of suffering, wanting sensual pleasures and seeking happiness through sensuality. When you really observe that desire, kama-tanha, desire for sense pleasures, is a driving force in many people's lives, constantly seeking sensory pleasure, sensory excitement, sensory interest, because the senses are impermanent and unsatisfactory, so you can't stay interested in something permanently. A condition, in an idea, in a religion, in so much of Bhatibhata or practice, meditation practice in Buddhism, is learning to deal with boredom, with anger, with jealousy and fear that it comes and goes in your conscious experience in daily life. It's not trying to perfect, get rid of these conditions, not trying to annihilate them. The Buddha made it very clear it's not an annihilating teaching, it's a teaching of understanding. So this understanding is very profound understanding. It's not knowing about something through the descriptions you find in the scriptures or what some teacher tells you. It's realizing for yourself what suffering is like this. And in my own practice, in the beginning years in Thailand, was a suffering, that in a monastery, learning to fit into a completely new way of life, feeling frustrated that I couldn't understand the language, feeling trapped in tradition, in rules, in things that I had no control over. I had to obey, I had to conform. And the suffering that one creates around conformity or obeying rules or following, not being able to follow your own desires. And so there's this puto, this witness, this awareness, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it, is awareness that not getting what you want is like this, or wanting something you don't have. Like so much of my early experience in meditation practice was through Visuddhimagga, trying to get jhanas according to the instructions in the Visuddhimagga. And attachment became a desire. I wanted to get it because I didn't have it. Or samadhi, the way samadhi is given such an elevated state in Buddhist terminologies, is that we see it as something we've got to get. And trying to get, the states of mind, to realize nibbana, to get nibbana is a kind of form of desire, wanting to get something you don't have. So in the First Noble Truth, there is dukkha to be understood. That's the wisdom approach of the Buddha. You start from the way it is, not from nibbana or from enlightenment, but from observing the witness position, the awakened consciousness to the way it is at this present moment. Santiti ko akalika dhamma, apparent here and now, timeless. So, you begin to observe the, regrets, guilt, or things that you regret about your past, what you've done or said in the past, can arise in the present. And attachment to that, either through trying to just involve yourself, get obsessed, indulge yourself with guilt and fear, or trying to suppress it. Those are the two extremes. Trying to indulge in it, get carried away into depressing mental states or frightened states of mind, or trying to resist it, trying to suppress it. But what is to understand it and not to define it or try to describe it as it has qualities, but suffering is observable very directly. Wanting something you don't have, wanting to get something that wanting to get enlightened because you feel there's something wrong with you. When people start meditating, they usually do it because they feel a lack, a sense of something's missing, something's wrong, and we tend to take that personally. We see it as some kind of personal defect. Either we go to psychotherapists or psychiatrists to deal with our mental states because of the dukkha, the suffering that we're experiencing. There's something wrong, something I shouldn't be, I shouldn't think the way I do, I shouldn't have desires or feelings the way I have them. And then people criticize me and say I should go to a psychiatrist. And so one gets one's messages from external sources, usually, about your worth, about your value as a child, as a boy, or as a girl. And so we develop the sense of identity with the physical form, and then we idolize the physical form, the perfect female form, the perfect male form, and we can define these because they're ideals of taking something like femininity or masculinity to perfection is a mental state we create. It's not like that. The body is, either masculine or feminine, and we identify with it. And then we also condition through culture, through the conditioning of our parents or our society, our social position, our religion, about what's right and wrong, good and bad, virtuous or vice. We acquire this sense of critical acceptance or unacceptance, of seeing what's right and wrong, good and bad. But Dhamma is not about right and wrong, good or bad. It's about the way things are. And that you can, when you try to describe the way things are, your mind goes quite blank. If I ask you to absolutely describe this moment clearly in words, your thinking is going to pack up. It'll stop you from thinking. And that's the way it is. But when you search for, it's nice or it's peaceful or interesting or boring or, you come up with something, but that's an afterthought. That's something you project into the present moment through habit, through wanting to define the indefinable, because the present moment isn't definable, it's knowable. You don't need to define it, describe it, because it's here and now, and it can only be the way it is. So whatever you're experiencing at this moment is like this, rather than you should be, I can tell you what you should be experiencing as some ideal. When I think you should be feeling at this moment, I can intimidate you, if you believe you got a lot of confidence in my opinions, I can intimidate you and tell you how you should feel at this moment. But that doesn't work. You can't feel the way somebody expects you to, but you can only feel the way what you're feeling, whether you like it or not, something else. So the scriptures are, I use the definition of the paradigm of, if you want to go to London from Amravati, you go out to the M1, and you see a sign saying London, and you say, well, it says London, it must be London. You're missing the whole point of the sign. The sign is pointing in a direction, and you follow the direction the sign's pointing to. The words London don't describe the sign at all. So, the Buddha used teachings very skillfully, and in fact, that one of the very attractive gifts that we have in Buddha Dhamma is that it's not doctrinal. You're not asked to believe in suffering or the Four Noble Truths or in Dhamma or in Buddha. We can believe in these as kind of tradition. So the external forms of Buddhist religion tend to be based on beliefs in Buddha and Dhamma and Sangha, but actually they're not beliefs. They're signs to the here and now. Like Buddha is awareness here and now. Dhamma is what you're aware of, the reality of now. And Sangha is the individual aware of the present moment as it is. So it's much more profound than just a belief in some kind of make-believe Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or traditional views about it. We're not, Buddha didn't ask us to believe in somebody called Buddha, but the word itself is significant because it's not personal. It's not a person of the past. It's not an Indian sage. It's awakened awareness here and now. So in Ngpa Cha's approach to mindfulness is using Puto, the Thai kind of pronunciation for Buddha, a kind of mantra form of Buddha. For one thing, as a mantra, you chant it over and over, which leads towards tranquility, because you're thinking just that one word rather than letting the mind wander in thought. So eventually the wandering mind, the mental states calm down and you experience tranquility. But that's not the enlightenment state. That's just merely using words to concentrate on something that you're thinking, Bhuta, Bhuto, Bhuto. Then with Vipassana, you're taking Bhuto as awareness and applying it to see suffering is like this. So in my early years at Wat Pah Po in Thailand, I began to be aware of wanting, feeling frustrated, not being able to understand the talks that Luang Por Chah would give, this feeling of frustration was like this. I began to be aware of frustration as I was actually experiencing it in the present moment, rather than trying to suppress it or rationalize it or believe, follow it. So confusion, mental confusion, desire to run away, to disrobe, were like this. Feeling lonely and lost in a situation and system that I didn't fully understand or fit into was like this. And Rinpoche would encourage this kind of reflection, because that's the way it is. You can't just ordain as a Buddhist monk if you're a foreigner, ordain in Thailand, and expect to fit in like it's your natural state, because you're assuming a totally different lifestyle, something that's almost the reverse of what your previous lifestyle was about. But you can observe your own feelings regarding that, your own American viewpoints or opinions about Thailand or Thai forest tradition. These come up. You can't help but cooperate from your cultural background. It's going to come up, the American attitude towards foreign countries and its own glorification of the American state is like this. And you begin to see that it's just conditioned phenomena rising and ceasing. It's empty. It's not something to grasp and to believe in. So your cultural background, you learn from that. It's like the second fetter, the second thing that binds us to ignorance is what they call Silabhata Baramasa, or the attachment to conventions. And so one of the advantages that foreign monks have when they ordain in Thailand is that you get a reflection about your own cultural biases, your own cultural opinions and views that aren't given much of a reflection when you're living in your own native country. You're having to deal with something new and different, something you don't quite appreciate or understand yet, or you want to. It doesn't mean I didn't find Thai culture or anything something I didn't agree with or didn't like. In some ways I actually, preferred it to the American, but they, it's still trying to look at Thailand through the views of an American conditioned mind, where consciousness isn't conditioned. You don't acquire consciousness after you're born. It's not, an American condition or a Thai condition. It's natural, it's Dhamma. The newborn baby is born in conscious form. If it's not conscious, it's a stillbirth. It's not a live baby anymore. So consciousness, whether it's in a female form or male form or a Thai or an American, black or white person, doesn't matter. It's the same consciousness. You can't label it, you can't own it. And so awakening, like the awakening to the way it is recognizing, realizing the natural consciousness that is impersonal, not culturally, not bound to culture or conventions. It's Dhamma here and now, apparent here and now. It's consciousness apparent here and now. It's timeless. It's experience that is right now, not about remembered experience of the past or imagined experiences in the future.
In terms of this insight, like you were talking earlier about Patiwade, one person was asking if you could help define or explain what is insight, how do you recognize it, how do you cultivate it?
Well, one thing, it's to be experienced individually. You know, we all have intuitions. You know, the intellect is with the brain. You know, it's conditioned like a computer. Right and wrong, good or bad, all conditioned. The critical mind, you know, red and blue, yellow and green, or these, you know, the color red doesn't say it's red. We call it red. And then in Thailand, you have a different word for red. But red is like this, rather than saying the Thai word for red is not as good as the English word for red. It's ridiculous, isn't it? To argue about the words and the way we project onto life, onto nature, our own views and opinions, our preferences, our biases, you know, this is what we do. We're always seeking, looking outward and judging things, criticizing things. And when we look inward, we tend to look at our faults or our weaknesses. So many of us that come to meditation, to Buddhism, to practice meditation, is we're self-critical because we've developed the critical faculty to such a high degree, we turn it inward. And we see mental states we don't like, we have fears, we have jealousies, we're timid, or we're self-conscious, we're shy, we want things that are impossible. We have all kinds of strange desires and fantasies that are conventionally considered wrong or bad or crazy, you know, whatever you want to call them. So, you know, the critical mind just won't stop. You know, you think, you know, I look back at my life, basically, I've been a good person when I lived most of my life from childhood. I wasn't a child that enjoyed cruelty or lying or things like that. I wanted to be a good boy. I wanted to please my mother and father. And I wanted to get good grades in school and so forth. So, you know, and so I've never been attracted to crime or to things that are unwholesome. But still, no matter how I develop the good points of my life, the critical habits of mine are so strong. They will take the thing I did wrong and remember it for the rest of my life. So you know, you think of how ridiculous it is. So one time I remember in Wapapo, in the first year, I was given a kuti, a meditation hut in the deep forest, which I liked very much. And, you know, it's what I wanted, so finally I got the kuti I wanted and had the time to meditate, but I kept feeling this anger and resentment towards something that happened to me when I was in the Navy 20 years before. Because I felt, you know, what happened to me in the Navy was unfair. And I'd sit there in my kuti in the forest in Thailand, developing this anger around something over a memory of the past, of feeling being judged and treated unfairly. And it had nothing to do with the situation I was immediately in here and now. I was quite happy with the kuti, I quite liked Lumpur and the monks and the lay people in Wat Pah Pong. You know, the place was a very nice monastery. So the resentment wasn't due to any immediate cause of feeling frustrated or angry, but just remembering some incident 20 years before that had nothing to do with the present situation. So I began to laugh. You know, I thought, this is really foolish, you know, getting so wound up, winding myself up with resentments about the past, when that's not the way it is. Right now, the conditions I'm in is like this, and I'm attaching to a memory of the past that I'm getting obsessed with. I'm obsessed with a memory which is really empty and has no heart, no core to it, no essence. A memory is just empty phenomena. So by reflecting in this way, you begin to see the resentments of the past, or your fears of the future, your worries about the state of affairs of the country, of your family in the future, your children, your parents. What's going to happen to me when I grow old? One can worry about that when you're young. So worry is all about the future. It's imagination that we create in the present, because the future at this moment, here and now, is the unknown, because there's only the here and now. It's you're experiencing now. The future you just imagine. You'll never experience the future. The conditions change in the now. So the things that change are what we call sankharas, or phenomena, or objects in consciousness. So their very nature is to change. You can't sustain a condition for very long. You can concentrate on it, cling to it and concentrate on it, but you can't sustain that for very long. It's temporary, because the nature of phenomena, of all conditions, is impermanence. And this is verifiable. It doesn't take much observation to observe that all conditions, all phenomena are impermanent and changing. But what doesn't change then in the present moment? What is permanent in the present moment is conscious awareness. Whether you begin to recognize, to have insight into this, it's because it's here and now. You're no longer just following the habits of your likings of love and hate and approval or disapproval. You're observing them. And so that experience is experienced in the present moment, rather than worrying about future experiences that you imagine, or feeling regret or guilt about experiences you remember in the past, which are memories.
So insight is, like, according to that question, insight is knowing this for yourself.
Knowing this for yourself. You can only know it for yourself. I can describe insight. It really is using words again for something that is intuitive. So intuition is more on the heart level. You feel life. You feel, you judge things according to your intellect, but you feel. You can pick up atmospheres or environmental situations or moods in yourself or in others through awareness.
You very much use that term intuition or intuitive awareness as a contrast to the thinking and the conceptualizing, don't you?
Yes.
More the knowing.
Because intuition, I remember in my own cultural background, we tend to think intuition is untrustworthy. We think women have a lot of intuitions, but it's untrustworthy. So it has to be defined with the intellect to make it real. But intuition is totally trustworthy. How we interpret the present moment is untrustworthy. So I might have prejudices or biases to certain conditions, and I can feel, a certain way intuitively, and then I tend to, and if I'm not aware, if I'm not using wisdom with awareness, then I tend to fall into my habit patterns of my biases, my prejudices, my views, my conceptions as intuitive, but they're not intuitive. They're just descriptions of right and wrong, good or bad, what you like or don't like. Because intuition isn't about right and wrong. It's like this. And that's with us all the time. We know, you know, no matter what you're thinking or how you're feeling, you're aware of it. But then, so if you're feeling sick, you know, you have an upset stomach, you're aware of it. Then you think, I have an upset stomach. That's something you create, is some kind of personal thing that you don't want. I don't want an upset stomach. What can I do about it? How can I get rid of it? I mean, that's thought again. That isn't intuition. That's judgment. That's habit of cultural conditioning, language conditioning. So, men, tend to, we tend to prefer the intellectual side of life, to define things and have everything reasonable and logical. So it's sometimes difficult for us to trust intuition because we don't value it. We don't see its worth. We tend to suppress it. Don't think negatively. Think positively. Don't make a scene, just forget it. Stiff upper lip. Be brave, be a man, Don't give in to your feelings. That's weakness. This is how I was brought up, so you think having feelings is a kind of weakness when it's intuitive, feeling of fear is like this, where the ideal man isn't afraid, he's fearless. You get these superheroes movies and that, they're absolutely fearless, and that's what you're told good, real men are like. But that's not the way things are. Fear is a natural, there's a lot to fear in just the conditions we find ourselves in, having a human body, identifying with it. It's subject to all kinds of possible pain and disease and sickness and criticisms from others, from external sources. So fear is like a primal emotion in the animal world, and all animals have this. It's an instinctual kind of emotion. But we tend to become neurotic with fear because we can be locked up in our safe apartments with all kinds of locks on the door and a guardian dog at the gate and burglar alarms on the windows, and still sit and have to be terrified of the future because we can conceive the future as something frightening, something we don't want. Now that's neurotic fear that we create when the conditions for fear are no longer, immediate. But we don't. But we intuit. We intuit fears like this. Even the neurotic fear, you become aware of it as you begin to see there's nothing to fear at this moment. Like sitting here in the conservatory here at Amaravati. There's no immediate dangers lurking outside or anything threatening me. But I can remember being frightened, not now, but in the past, just feeling dread about the future, possibilities for failure or disease in the future, like this pandemic, COVID pandemic, is rather frightening because we imagine all kinds of possibilities of dying terrible death in the future from this COVID virus, which is lurking under everything. You know, behind the bushes. Every person around might be carrying it. I mean, you can drive yourself bonkers just by imagining every possibility of COVID, some kind of COVID virus lurking all around you. And yet, you know, you're creating that with thought. It's not that it's wrong or anything, you're not judging it, but you can observing what thinking is. That's another important issue, is that we tend to believe our thoughts. We believe what we think, and what we think we are, we tend to believe it. And so this believing is unquestioning grasping of conditioned phenomena. When you believe everything you think, your own views, your own opinions about yourself and the world, you're grasping ideas that you've acquired. It's not intuitive. It's not sensitive, it's just habit. So, you know, thinking is when the thoughts are believed in, the space between thoughts is recognized as empty, appears as empty. The thoughts seem to be fraught with information and importance, where the space between thoughts goes totally unnoticed, or just empty, meaningless, boring, you know, we tend to not see its value. So thinking is an acquired habit. What isn't acquired is the space between thinking. That's Dhamma, that's natural. When we look at the thoughts themselves, you know, we become involved with liking or disliking, approving or disapproving of them. They're either good or bad thoughts, right or wrong. And these thoughts can be about ourselves. You know, we believe what we think. You know, when you hear hear the news on the radio, you know, people are thoroughly convinced they're believing in what they're thinking. Or they don't believe what they're thinking, but they're lying about they believe what they're thinking. And lying is a form of thinking. And what you think is the truth is still thinking. The truth is always here and now. Reality is here and now. It's not tomorrow. It wasn't the past. So, you know, in Buddha Dhamma, you're observing thinking. To observe thinking, you have to intentionally think. You know, when you're trying to stop thinking, you can't do it. You can temporarily kind of suppress thought, but you can't sustain it. So I encourage this deliberate thinking and observing it. You listen to yourself think anything, you know, thinking nonsense, thinking sense, thinking something good, thinking something bad. You know, you're not interested in the content of the thoughts, but in the space between the thoughts. You're focused on the space between thoughts. And this, through intentional thinking, it's like listening to yourself thinking. So you think a word like I, you're intentionally thinking the English pronoun I, and there's a space between I and am. You're interested in the space between I and am, not in the pronoun I or the verb am. Because we don't notice that. And yet that's the reality that we can trust. Consciousness has no form, has no preferences, but it's here and now, where what we think, you know, is conditioned through the ego, through identity with the form, with the body, with the cultural conditioning, religious conditioning, social conditioning. All these are strong identities that we aren't born with, that are not natural, they're artificial. What is natural then at this moment is awareness, is consciousness. It's Pajitang Veti Dapo, we need to be realized individually through wisdom.
Thank you very much, Paul.